Hello and welcome once again, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of SALT, sharing and learning together. Now, before we begin, we want you to know that this project is undertaken by the Masters of Divinity 2 students and Master of Arts in Clinical Counseling 1 students of Oriental Theological Seminary. This is a part of our course requirement, and so we want you to know that everything that we are doing today, it's solely for educational and awareness purposes. My name is Nandilo, and I'll be the host for this session. And joining me today are three friends, scholars in their own making. So let me introduce them to you. We have Ms. Mongsen Lepla Lemo. She's currently pursuing her Masters of Divinity in the second year. The gentleman next to her is Along Pongen. He is also from M.Div second year. And then we have Ms. Vibizono Kro. She is currently pursuing her Master of Arts in Clinical Counseling. She's in her first year. So in this episode of SALT, we'll be having a conversation on loneliness. Now, this is an issue that is not strange to us, and in fact, it's something that all of us we go through at different stages of our lives. And yet, this is also something that we don't really want to open up because perhaps because we are ashamed, and also there's the fear of judgment. Well, today, we just want to shed light on this topic. We are hoping that the insights that you've gained through your studies will help us to understand what loneliness is. And so, when we talk about a lonely person, I think the conventional understanding of a lonely person is someone who is by himself all the time. Maybe that person, he does not talk much, he does not hang around with people much. Maybe he has a very few friends, and so that's usually the first thing that comes to our mind when we talk about a lonely person. But in reality, I think loneliness it's much more deeper than that. And so, would you kindly help us to understand, based on the studies that you have done, what exactly is loneliness and how is it experienced? Any one of you may choose to answer that question.
So, the idea of loneliness itself has been very narrowed in our mindset. Like, just like you have mentioned, we think like if we see a person walking alone or, eating alone in a cafe or something, we tend to take it as he or she is lonely because that idea itself has been, implemented in our brains since our childhood days. But then, see, if a person is surrounded by a group of people, he also can feel lonely. It's not like those who are surrounded by people are not lonely at all. That's the paradox of loneliness, I believe. As I was doing this research and as I was doing my study, I found that there are various types of loneliness, like emotional loneliness, social loneliness, right? Chronic loneliness, and all those things. Now, if I have a close connection with a loved one, and if I lose her or him, right, the feeling of loneliness creeps inside of me. So that's emotional loneliness. And be it society, when I cannot connect with a group of people or I cannot openly express myself with a group of people, that makes me lonely. That's social loneliness. And then there's a chronic loneliness. Actually, that's very dangerous, because it's a long-term loneliness, or if I were to say it is a permanent loneliness. That type of loneliness, it stays with us forever, and then it becomes more and more dangerous to a human life, to an individual life as well. And transient loneliness, it's a type of loneliness that's, a temporary loneliness. It can come and go at any time. So there are various types of loneliness, and I believe that each one of us, instead of just saying loneliness, we are included in either one or two of that loneliness. So that's the type of loneliness that I have, get to know through my studies.
Thank you for sharing your insight with us. I think what you have said also tells us that loneliness it can be a very complex issue at times. Um, Now you mentioned something about the paradox of loneliness, how someone can be alone and yet be perfectly fine, and on the other hand we have someone who is surrounded by many people, who has many friends, and yet he just feels emotionally disconnected. Um, I think this paradox is very real in our context as well. We pride ourselves in being a very close-knit community where families and clans are very strong, and yet a lot of us, especially the youths, we deeply struggle with loneliness. So, uh, what do you think, are some of the factors that can lead one into loneliness?
That's a very important question. You see, loneliness today is not so much about always sitting alone inside the room. It is about feeling emotionally distanced and unnoticed. And I think there are various factors and there are so many reasons why this is becoming so common in our times today. I'd like to point out three factors. The first is family breakdown and relationship conflicts. When parents and children they're not able to openly talk about their struggles and their problems, or if there is constant relationship issues, constant misunderstandings, then people can feel isolated even inside their own homes. And in our Naga context, this is very common among young people because young people they really struggle to open up about their struggles because of fear of being judged, or one of the most common reason would be the generational gap issue between the parents and the children. And so they carry the problems inside, and then this silence often grows into loneliness. And the second one is the pace of life is much faster today. Everyone is so busy studying, working, and even chasing goals. And but in this business, sometimes we struggle and we forget to sit and then converse with people. We forget to have real conversation with people, and that leads to people carrying their own problems and struggles silently alone. And the third one would be the expectations can also create loneliness. Many people feel the pressure to fit in, and many feel that they have to reach they have to live to a certain expectations or standards, whether it has to do with the kind of job that you hold, the way you look, or how active you are even in the church or in the society. And when they're not able to reach to that standard, they feel left out or they feel unseen. And in our Naga context, young people are expected to be, we are expected to do well in our studies, hold government jobs, or even look after our family's reputation. And so for someone who is not able to reach up to that standard or that level, that person will definitely feel like an outsider, though he may be physically present in the family gatherings and in the church gatherings. So yeah, this all this pressure, it leads people to wear mask, though they may be going through a lot of things inside. They carry a happy face outside just to be accepted in the society. And the gap between who I'm expected to be and who I really am, sometimes this become a very painful source for loneliness to creep in. So yeah, loneliness is not so much about it's less about being physically alone. It's more about the lack of real and having a safe and authentic connection.
Our friend Along has also mentioned this, but it's not so much about um, you know how many friends you have, how many people you have around you, but it's rather it's about that lack of emotional connectedness. Um, well, moving on, I want to pose this question because I thought this was really interesting. Now, we also know that some people, they choose to um, voluntarily retreat, what we call as solitude. And solitude in itself, it's not a bad thing, but sometimes people misunderstand, um, may misunderstand that, So, can you also help us understand what is the difference between solitude and loneliness? And like I said, solitude is not it's not a bad thing. So, how can we help people to see solitude as something that we should not fear, but as something that can strengthen our inner lives?
So the difference between loneliness and solitude is loneliness is a painful awareness that lacks close and meaningful contact with others. It is a painful experience with a feeling of isolation and sadness, where everyone feel at times, where everyone experience with all age groups. Loneliness is painful, draining, and unpleasant, whereas solitude can be refreshing, rejuvenating, and voluntary withdrawal from others. It is a nourishing experience which we can have a time of self-reflection, communication with God, and to have communication with inner self. When we look into the Bible, we see Jesus, despite of his busy schedule, he voluntarily retreated himself to isolated places where he could have time for meditation, prayer, and solitude. Solitude can bring new energy and deeper connection with God. If our alone time does not refresh us, we have to understand that we are falling into a trap of loneliness. So just as that, as a follower of Christ, we should also imply that for a healthy living.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. I think it's very important to make the distinction between solitude and loneliness because we have uh, sometimes we have this tendency to mistake solitude as loneliness. Um, but as you have said, those two are very different things, and in fact, solitude can also have many benefits to well, for us, and it could lead us to grow also for personal growth. Also, it's very important. Now, every one of us we go through loneliness from time to time, but a lot of the times that's just a phase of our life, a small phase of our life. But in some cases we also see that people, loneliness, it persists, and when that does, it can start to affect that person. So from your studies, can you please share with us what are some of the symptoms, what are some of the unhealthy signs that may start to show up in a person who is suffering from chronic loneliness?
Everyone feels lonely from time to time, but when loneliness lasts for a long time, it affects our both body and mind. A person may begin to feel very lonely, sad, or anxious and worthless, and they might have trouble controlling their emotions or thinking problems. Over time, this can even lead to memory problems or even increase the risk of heart diseases like Alzheimer's. It also affects our body by increasing stress, weakens our immune system, and it causes sleep problems or high blood pressure, and it also affects our heart. It causes heart issues. To cope, some people may start to consume unhealthy habits like drinking, using drugs, or avoiding eating poorly or avoiding exercise. They might also make poor decisions which can hurt them and even to others. These are all signs that loneliness become a serious problem and that needs attention.
When we suffer deeply from loneliness, it can also lead us to make very poor choices. We make compulsive choices, and also engage in unhealthy habits such as um, substance abuse. And so those are very real struggles that sometimes we tend to overlook. Um, okay, now coming back to Along, you know, we discussed about the different factors of that can lead someone into loneliness. I've been thinking about situations where factors which have caused a person to go into loneliness. There are situations where those cannot be reversed. Um, let's think about someone who has lost a spouse. Maybe someone has lost a wife, a husband, or let's take the example of an elderly person. Maybe that elderly citizen has been abandoned by his or her children, and so in such situations, it is very difficult for that person, to see hope. And so, can you please tell us, how we can help those people find hope in that kind of situation, and maybe even healing, and also for that matter, joy. So, yeah, would you like to share your insights on that?
Yeah, so actually, we have this thing called situational loneliness, where loneliness is brought to us by the situation itself. For example, you have mentioned like losing of spouse or getting old, right? Those things, eventually, all of us will experience that, and it comes with loneliness as well. Now, if I were to like just say it, I would say accept what reality gives us. That's reality. However, we can take certain measures you know, suffering people suffering from those loneliness. We can go to them and then give them biblical reference or tell stories which is in the Bible about loneliness or about losing everything they have. For example, the story of Job, right? He loses everything, yet he still puts his faith in God. And for instance, the story of Joseph, right, where he has been sold to a very alien place. He knows no one in that place, right? That yeah, we can see that loneliness is there. No? However, he still obeys God. No? He still keeps his faith in God. So those stories can help certain people facing like situational loneliness. It, however, in the process of that, we should be mindful that it should always be God-centered. When we tell stories about Job, when we tell stories about Joseph, it's not them that is the hero, but God is the hero. We should always remind them. We can use verses like in Matthew chapter 28, verses 20. It says, "I am always with you." Right? Jesus gives us an assurance that no matter what situation we are in, He is always with us. So, those things can help them not completely heal the loneliness. I'm not saying that, but it can help them, fight their own battles. It give them an assurance that God is with them through this phase of their life. Yeah.
All right. Just to follow up with that question, what do you think about the responsibility of the church today? Because when we think of the church, we think of a community that is loving, a community that is caring, a community that is interested and invested in the lives of each other. But in reality, we know that our churches are far from that. I think our churches have, become cold and distant. Our churches have been reduced to a place where we come once every week, we sing some songs, we worship, and then we just leave that place without even knowing who was sitting beside us. And so that's the church. That's our churches today. And it's difficult to imagine how people can, you know, find a sense of belonging in that kind of space. And so, um, what are some things that we can, start doing differently at an individual level?
For me personally, I think change has to begin with small and intentional steps. One of the things that we can do is to practice hospitality. Inviting a new or a quiet person over tea or coffee. And in that way, this little effort can open door for deeper relationship. I also believe in the power of small group fellowships. The big Sunday service is too impersonal. So when we gather in small circles of between 4 to 8 people, then we can share life, we can share our struggles, we can pray together and notice when someone is missing out or when someone is struggling. Visitations is something that I would also like us to practice more in the context of a church when, especially people who are not able to come and attend the church services, especially people with disabilities, the old and the aged, and even the sick people. I think instead of them coming to church, we can take the church to their places. And most importantly, I think we have to normalize vulnerability. When leaders of the church and members of the church are vulnerable, I think that gives the permission for other members also to be open about their problems, to be honest about their problems. I think in this way, true care and real connection can begin.
Yeah, I think those are very practical steps. Um, and I really liked when you say um, why should we wait for people to come to our churches why not we take the church to them instead? And I think that's something that we can all start practicing. I mean, we don't have to wait for our pastors, our church leaders to initiate those kind of visitations. Also, just we can go and visit people. Um, it can be a very informal visit also, and so those are just. I mean, I was just thinking of those things also, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now we've been talking about loneliness for quite a while now, but at the end of the day, this is something that we can never truly avoid, and especially for Christian ministers, um, you know, this is this is something that's very real. And for all those of us who are aspiring to be Christian ministers, um, for sure, we will go through this phase in our lives someday. I mean, the Bible does not hide it. We know from the examples of Jesus, who also experienced extreme pain and loneliness at the Garden of Gethsemane. I think one of you has pointed that out. And then there's Paul, towards the end of his life, all his friends abandoned him. And so the Bible mentions people who went through this phase of loneliness. And so um, loneliness, we can say it's something that we can expect in ministry. And so, since this is something that we cannot escape, what are some advices that you would like to give us on how we can prepare ourselves to, face loneliness in the future, if at all it comes to us?
I think that's a very real question. You see, because loneliness is something that we will all face, and especially people in ministry, sooner or later, loneliness is something that we will all be facing. One of the things that we can, one of the things that we can do is to be truly deeply rooted in God's word and prayer. When Jesus was in Gethsemane, he opened up to God. And that's a beautiful reminder that we need not keep our struggles to ourselves. We need not keep our problems to ourselves. Second, I remind myself that there is a difference between isolation and solitude. Isolation can sometimes drain us, but solitude in the presence of God can really refresh us. Now, if we enjoy being in the presence of God, then I think loneliness, it becomes less of a problem. And another practical thing that we can do is to have one or two trusted friends with whom we can be honest about our struggles, with whom we can be vulnerable. It need not be a big circle. Just one or two faithful ones will do. Even Paul, when he was in prison, he had Timothy and others to encourage him. We can also have few friends whom we can be open about our struggles. So instead of allowing loneliness to drive us away from God, we can, allow this to draw closer to God. And the last thing, it's a reminder. So instead of letting loneliness push us away from God, we can use it to draw closer to God. And remember God's promise that He will never leave us nor forsake us.
So for me, I think the reason why that loneliness occurs is because we as people, even us, we tend to think pastors or missionaries at a very different level, right? We build that barrier between us and pastors because they work for God. We have that mindset, and then that builds a bridge of a gap between us and the pastors, or us theologians with the common people, right? So that causes us loneliness, not being able to go and connect with them. However, what's the use if you just sit and then just accept what loneliness is? Instead, why can't we go and build the relationship with them, with people? Might be not that easy, but still we can try, and there's nothing wrong in trying. Now we can go down to their level, we can go to their house, we can also invite them to our house, and then we can build the relationship between us and the congregation and the people. So those things can help Christian ministers, be it evangelists, be it missionaries, be it pastors, to seal the bridge between us and between them and the people, the common people.
Okay, thank you for sharing those thoughts. Like we've been saying, um, whether we like it or not, loneliness is something that we cannot escape. At some point in our lives, we will go through loneliness, and yet when when we come face to face with loneliness, it need not necessarily drag us into despair, um, because like we say, in the midst of every crisis, God also provides us with an opportunity to grow, to draw closer to Him. And so it's about finding meaning in that kind of situation. And so maybe in the future, if any one of us should find ourselves in such a situation, then maybe we can use that opportunity to grow, to build our relationship with God. All right. I think we have discussed a lot of things, and I really wish that we could keep on talking about this issue, but we will have to wrap up things from here. Thank you once again to all of our panelists for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us so honestly. I'm sure that this conversation has encouraged you and given you something to think about in your own journey. We have seen through this conversation that loneliness is very real, but please remember that you are not alone. There is hope, and there are always people around you who care about you. And so, just reaching out to those people can make a difference. And just as importantly, I hope that this conversation has also reminded all of us to be attentive to those around us, um, who might be struggling silently. And so, if you see someone who is struggling through loneliness, then I encourage you not to ignore that person, but you know, be the hands and feet of Jesus to them. And so, on that note, we will close this session. Thank you once again, everyone, for watching. Stay informed, stay safe.